Welcome to Fresh Thinking. I'm your host, Greg. Today, we are going to talk about one of the most important shifts in mind planning from traditional deterministic to stochastic planning. And today, I'm joined by Dr. Tarrant Elkington. Tarrant is our general manager at Snowden Optiro. He has more than 17 years of consulting experiences over various commodities, and he has traveled almost all the continents. Welcome, Tarrant.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, great to be here.
Okay, so as a resource geologist, I think it is critical to understand at least, have a basic understanding at least about how our resource model be treated after we deliver to our mining engineer colleagues, so we can make sure that the information has been delivered accurately. And in other words, if we spend a couple weeks to assess grade uncertainty, geology uncertainty, but all those information ended up in ether, so that would be a pity. So in case you didn't watch our past podcasts, we get two episodes which are 62 and 66, talking about all the details of open pit and underground mine planning process. But here, Tarrant, can you give us a very high-level review?
Yeah, I guess maybe for open pit, like a normal mine planning process that we would go through, which is generally based on a single block model. For open pit, we would go through, develop up, estimate the amount of dilution, whatnot we might have, complete a pit optimization to determine the limits of our deposit, then design pits in stages that we can then use to schedule, determine waste dump locations, estimate haulage requirements, equipment requirements, and then ultimately costs. So that's generally how we would, go through a standard mine planning process for open pit. On underground, we look at stope optimization rather than pit optimization, but
right.
And we have to design our access differently, but the general process is the same.
Okay, thanks. So what is stochastic mine planning, and how does it differ from the traditional one?
Yeah, well, at a very simple level, so deterministic mine planning is kind of what's badged as traditional mine planning, which is based on a single estimate of the model, of prices, of costs, so on. Stochastic mine planning simply just recognizes that there is uncertainty and there is just not one version of reality that that we know is going to happen. There's a lot of uncertainty in price, in grade, and things like that.
Exactly.
So it is about planning for that, or incorporating that into your planning, because it's more likely to be uncertain than it is to be exactly how you planned it.
Yep. So what are the potential benefits of this approach? I mean, the reality is always more complicated than one set of the fixed parameters.
Yeah, so because we do have uncertainty, anything that we, like if we do a plan that considers that uncertainty, we think it should be better or more robust, right? Yeah. And we could talk about lots of things, but we just talk about grade, in this podcast.
Yeah.
But some of the benefits that you might get is that that you might get more robust forecasts over time. So I might be, we might get a range of outcomes, but I might be concerned that we can't fuel our plant, right? So under a range of different realizations of our of the ore body that we can generate via conditional simulation or some other method, if I have considered that, I might think, rather than a single model saying, yes, binary 1, 0, we're going to fill our plant, it might be a 90% chance that we fill our plant. And in the other 10%, we might fall short by 10%. Is that acceptable? Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but it's good to know.
Yep.
And then I think the other part of it is that that if we consider the uncertainty, we might help eliminate future errors for being too confident about working on a single model. So I mean, a single estimate might say that the gold is here,
Yeah.
right? Whereas the range of outcomes might mean it's here, or it could just be over here, and it'd be.
Exactly.
I always think it would be quite sad to go and design your pit or your stope, and then just have the high grade sitting in the wall because you were too confident in the estimate, which is just an estimate, was of that. And I think probably the final thing was uncertainty is not always bad. And if you understand the uncertainty, if you model it, maybe you could take advantage of that. And so, yeah, there's maybe some potentials with grade uncertainty and others that we could take advantage of.
Definitely. I think that's true because most of the time we have to deal with a very limited data and to give the enough resolution or details for the robust mine planning, probably, especially at the early stage. So it sounds like the stochastic planning have a lot of advantages, but how's that adopted in the industry?
Look, I think, and like when we talk about stochastic mine planning, usually the basis for that is conditionally simulated model.
Yep.
That, correct me if I'm wrong, generates a series of equiprobable grade or model realizations. And that technology is not new. It has been, this has been an approach that's been developed by, over the last at least 20, 30 years, and conditional simulation going, back many more years than that. So it's not completely new. What is changing is the I guess, methods, efficiencies, computational power.
Yep.
But I guess the adoption of it has been slow. Implicitly, it's a great idea, but in practical terms, it hasn't been really hasn't been applied in practice, and there's few reasons for that. One is still the computational complexity of both generating reasonable simulations and then what to do with them.
Yep.
So I think there's still some, people have been advancing that, but it's still got a way to go, and people maybe sometimes struggle to get their head around a single plan, but considering multiple plans, multiple versions of reality, more than one number, that's pretty hard to understand.
Yep.
And I think, at the end of the day, do you get one plan out of this? Well, yes and no. But if you have multiple versions of reality to present, even though like in the guidance in, say JORC is to report potentially to report a range or uncertainty, so this would give you that potential to do it. It's still hard for people to wrap their head around something that's not a single definitive number.
Yeah.
I guess what's also holds up is the lack of software to be able to support it. So there's probably only one tool, and that's developing at the moment, which is a real stochastic mine planning tool. And that's still largely going through testing with the larger mining companies and whatnot, and probably hasn't found its way into the mainstream.
Okay.
That
I guess practically a lot of mining projects, they don't have the budget or time to run the multiple, scenarios analysis. This is different from sensitivity tests, right? So sensitivity tests you just run with a couple set of the parameters. For stochastic mine planning, you need to run the whole bunch of realization. Let's say probably tens or hundreds of that. That will be stochastic mine planning.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a really interesting area, and would love to have all the time, in the world to be able to explore it and do all these iterations to understand that. But I guess the one, and I've gone through the range of feelings about it, from being super excited about it to trying to take a pragmatic approach or a pragmatic view of it to say, well, what's the benefit that I'm getting for this versus the time that I'm investing? And so in our work, typically, things need to get turned around quickly. That doesn't really
Exactly.
have a great environment to testing these concepts. And I think the other thing that I think that people haven't discussed very widely is that we are an industry that is driven off of resources and reserves, and that conditionally simulated models or stochastic, the inputs for our stochastic planning
Yep.
aren't typically. Sometimes there are a few instances of people using them to declare resources, but they're typically used as a parallel process to your resource reserve process. So if I, as a mining engineer, can't take this package and that be called a resource, then I can't create a reserve. So that's outside of my typical, business planning process and whatnot. So it still becomes a parallel process that might be interesting, but actually is not linked to all the deliverables that I have to do on a day-to-day basis. So if some of those things were to get addressed, then I think it would become more mainstream.
Yeah, agree. And one interesting thing to mention is we did a quick survey on all the ASX releases for March 2025. So we literally looked through all the announcements related with the resource update, and there are about 25 of them, and most of them are still ordinary kriging, and about 15% still use inverse distance, and about 1% use nearest neighbor. So as you can see, none of them really used the conditional simulation to update or report their resources. And I think that is fair to say for probably last couple of years at least.
Yeah, and look, I mean, those things have their place, and that's that's fine. I'm not a geologist, but I think one thing that I think generally that geologists fail to recognize, because I think there's a frustration probably from geologists in saying, well, I'm producing these simulations, but the mining engineers aren't using them, so maybe I won't bother producing them. It's like this loop, this negative loop. But I think the point that I make around not, what can be declared as resource and reserve is actually an important one, because until the mine planner can use that to report reserves, they're going to focus on what models can be used to do that.
Agree, fully agree. And what do you think of this idea that we just use one of the realization for the mine planning? Would that be doable?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a view of some, when you first come into it, you say, well, that's easy. I'll just produce. I've got 100 versions of the grade. I'll just go produce 100 different mine plans. But that'll take a long time.
Yeah.
But secondly, is it worth doing that? Well, no. You could probably just do 10 and get the same impact. But what we've got is a set of data for now. So if we produce 10 different mine plans, you still need to enact one, right? So from an open pit perspective, you've got this data, you've got to do a design.
Okay.
Right? A single plan. At least from now, it can change in a year's time or whatever, month's time, but you've still had to have one. You can't just run parallel universes where you've got two different things. And when you're going to go and generate more information by drilling and whatever, that is going to show you which thing that maybe look like a realization ends up being in grade control. But by that time, your pit walls for this stage that you're doing is probably already defined. So you are cheating if you are thinking that you could use even the median. Some people say, "Oh, just use the median pit." No, that's wrong. And if you do plan a pit on a single realization, the chances are it's not going to be a balanced view of all things, possibilities, and B, I think you've got quite a big risk of that high grade sitting in your wall, right? Okay. Because in another, in that realization, the high grade might be here, but in the next realization, or maybe, 5 or 10 of the 20 that you're looking at, it could be sitting in the wall and you should have had your pit in a completely different location. That's useful information because it means that we know where we need to drill or whatever. But so I think that's the reason, in an open pit, you should take into account the grade uncertainty, but it should take a balanced view of it and do a single plan. Underground is different. So underground, I think you don't mine the resource model, exploration model.
Never.
No, your resource model is really just giving you an indication of the tonnage and grade that you're going to get on a level and generally where it is. But you're going to do grade control and you're going to design your stopes on that grade control. Okay. So long as your simulations you've generated are based on the realizations that understand what level of information you're going to get with the grade control, then you could possibly do planning on a single realization, but you can't use that single realization as the plan. You would need to do a plan on, say, each of them, and that might tell you the range of tons and grade that you get on a level, and might tell you the potential extents to which I don't want to put my infrastructure, my ventilation, my footwall drive, my decline, things like that. That's the thing you want to avoid, right? And so I think it's different with open pit and underground, because in underground you can change your design based on new information as you get it before you actually implement it.
Cool. So, the reality is uncertainty are there, but considering all the limits, practical limits, we can't really put in there yet in the real life. But so from your point of view, how should we bring this gap?
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways that you can attack it, right? So one is to accept that people don't like multiple plans, and say, well, how can I, if I know that this conditional simulation, methodology and this uncertainty is great information for me, how can I use that to develop a single plan that takes it into account in a balanced way, particularly for an open pit? Yeah. I'm more thinking there. So can you, and I think there are ways, and we can talk about it later, but that you could convert that model into a single model that we could use for planning that takes a balanced view of all, and it's not just taking the average grade of the blocks. Yeah. One particular technique that I'm curious about, and not being a geologist, is local conditional simulation that takes all the realizations you have and converts them into and uses them for ranking and determining the grade distribution to apply spatially within a block model, but considering all the possibilities, in a balanced way. And I think while that doesn't give you all the information on multiple locations spatially, I think it's a good step in the right direction to at least get a balanced view.
I agree with you. Yep.
Yeah, but I think, and then the other way, of course, is to go down the software front to build software methodologies to continue to, like the COSMO CPI software that they're trying out at the moment, to be able to deal with this in scalable ways and develop really interesting, results and make it, simple enough that people can
do that,
run it in a similar period of time.
Exactly. We have to be practical.
Yes. Yeah. That's there's the academic or the theory, and then there's the practice. So.
Yeah, I did some search before this podcast, and the discussion about the stochastic mine planning can go back to like 30, 40 years before, and people mention all the complicated algorithms, but I guess the practicality, that's a hurdle that stops it becoming a part of the workflow.
And I think the word I would use is to be pragmatic and always try to, even though it's a shiny, conditional simulation and stochastic plan, it might be shiny, toys and, very interesting things. I find them very interesting. We just always need to tie them to reality and the value that you're going to get for the effort that you're putting in. It needs to lead to what's it going to mean for dollars, at the end of the day for the company? What am I saving drill meters? Am I increasing the number of ounces I'm going to produce each year? Am I reducing the cost that I have to, because I'm putting mining in the right locations and whatnot? Am I getting less abuse from investors because I'm putting out reasonable ranges of production forecasts? These are all real things that add benefit, but you need to be thinking about that rather than just the basic premise that there is uncertainty and I just need to do something about it, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that draws this podcast to a close. Thanks, Tarrant. Thanks for joining us for this interesting discussion about the stochastic mine planning. So if you would like to listen to more of our podcasts, feel free to find that on YouTube or any other mainstream podcast platforms. And if you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you will be kept updated. Thanks.